Hello and welcome back to Laughing Through the Pain, Navigating Wellness. I'm Richard L. Blake. We've got Andrew E. Sam, my co-host here, and we've got Dorian Soanes with us today. He has a master's in personalised nutrition and is a nutritional therapist. And he was my therapist, my nutritional therapist for a long time, and hence I wanted to get him on. So welcome, Dorian.
Thank you very much for having both of you. It's great to be here.
It's great. Thank you. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thanks, mate. Yeah, I got a writing commission this week, if it still counts as a commission if you don't get paid. Is that still a commission?
I don't know. Is that charity work then, rather than commission?
No, it's just that I'd like a writing credit, and a couple of actors. So yeah, that was a good news story.
Yeah. Good news story. Excellent. Congratulations.
Pro bono.
Otherwise, I've let
pro bono.
Exactly. Pro bono. That's it. Yeah,
that's the one.
And I'm actually a bit nervous about this episode because I smashed a Domino's pizza over the weekend.
And Dorian's here to punish you.
We definitely don't. Well, listen, I just went on my son's rugby tour and there was no good nutritional options. So we're probably not in too dissimilar a boat in that one.
Okay.
And,
reassuring.
Post-rugby, hot dogs, clubs or penguins and orange squash. Is that still what you get?
That was basically the only option. So it was like a 48-hour fast, or do I just have bacon sandwiches and sausage rolls and stuff like that?
That is one of the worst things about America, is can't get good sausage rolls. But thankfully we have a good friend out here who makes exceptional ones, so we survive. There we go. Anyway, enough about sausage rolls. So Dorian, tell us why we should not eat the sausage rolls. That's a good place to start.
Well, I don't know that you shouldn't eat sausage rolls. I mean, I think
correct answer.
I think actually one of the problems in the wellness space currently is basically people have gone way too over the top when it comes to restriction, right? And obviously, there are better practices with diets that we can do. There are better choices that we can make with our diet, but that doesn't necessarily have to be that you go full bore on restriction all the time. And actually, I'll be honest, that what I see in my practice at the moment, I see more problems with people who've gone too far on restriction one way or the other and have actually caused themselves extra problems, right? So the human gut, if you look at how the human gut works, it's actually designed to be really flexible, right? Where to a certain extent, we can put almost anything in there and get nutrients out of it. And if you have a sealed gut lining, right, you have, a healthy gut microbiome, your gut function, I think gut function is something that hasn't got enough attention when compared to, say, the microbiome in recent years. If your gut function, which kind of basically gut function is stomach acid, bile secretion, pancreatic enzyme secretion, peristalsis of your gut, right? If that's all working properly and you don't have leaky gut, within reason, you can eat almost anything and it shouldn't necessarily be a problem, right? Now, obviously, if all you're eating is Domino's pizzas, right? All sausage
hypothetically.
All sausage rolls, right? There are certain issues with that. So you're not really going to regulate your metabolite, your appetite very well. You're going to be tempted to overconsume. You're going to get insulin resistance if you overconsume. You're probably going to run into problems with nutrients down the line because those foods are devoid of essential nutrients. You're low in amino acids, right? It's high in fat, high in carbohydrates. But apart from that, should you completely cut out sausage rolls? It depends. It's probably the best answer.
Okay, good to know. Andy, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, what are the kind of pitfalls that most people are falling into then? I mean, take the average office worker in London, again, hypothetically.
Yeah.
What are the kind of common mistakes that people can easily kind of correct?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the most common mistake, there's a big difference probably from the general population, your average office worker and my clients, right? So I would say probably the average office worker is probably eating quite a low nutrient diet. The average thing is sort of a bowl of oats in the morning or something, and then a sandwich for lunch, and then your only proper meals really in the evening. It tends to be very low in protein, right? Low protein diets is something I've almost never met anyone that's on a sufficient protein diet. Like, that's usually the first thing that I will get people to do, is to track their protein and see where they are. Protein isn't just about like bodybuilding, which a lot of people think it is, or building muscle, although that is extremely important to maintain lean tissue. Protein is made of amino acids, right? And amino acids, there are 21 amino acids, 9 of which are essential. Essential means you can't make them in your body, right? You have to consume them. And there are some that are conditionally essential. So, like, for example, glycine is conditionally essential. It means you can make it in your body, but you're probably better off eating some of it as well. But essential amino acids, like, they have a host of functions. So methionine and cysteine, these are essential amino acids that you'd find in protein foods. They're part of your detoxification system, right? You actually do something called methylation, which is a biochemical process involved in detoxification, but also DNA renewal. You use amino acids. So actually, a detox diet, there is no such thing as a detox diet, but you could argue that a detox diet is actually a high protein diet. You could argue. L-glutamine rebuilds and repairs your gut lining, right? That's an amino acid. Leucine and isoleucine, essential amino acids involved in muscle building and building lean tissue, which again is not just about how you look or bodybuilding. It's also about metabolic health and also your immune health. Your muscle has a lot to do with immune health as well. So I would say low protein is a big one, right? And then probably after that, most people probably eat slightly too many processed foods, which are like sausage rolls, right? And Domino's pizza, which are devoid of nutrients. And that's how we kind of come full circle to this point in the conversation.
Yeah. I saw there was a frightening new study that showed like there's 1 billion people who are now obese in the world. It's the first time we've ever had 1 billion obese people. And they're actually classifying it not as obesity, but as nutritional deficiency, because you would think these people are, have got plenty of nutrients in their body, but because of the foods they're eating, these ultra processed foods, that is actually leading to malnutrition.
Yeah, and there's like that's one thing. It's like nutrients will help you regulate your appetite, right? Your body has signals that tell you what certain foods you're eating will stimulate your appetite. Will suppress your appetite. So ghrelin. I actually did my dissertation in ghrelin. Funnily enough, ghrelin is your major appetite hormone, right? The higher your ghrelin is, the hungrier you are. And if you're eating nutritionally devoid foods, your body's hungry for nutrients, which actually means your appetite keeps going until you get those nutrients. And if the food is poor in nutrients, you're going to eat more. There's actually something called the protein leverage hypothesis, which basically describes this exact process, but specific to protein, that all mammals will consume a certain amount of food until they hit their protein targets, right? And I actually think there's more evidence coming out now that it's not just protein, it's about other nutrients as well.
So how do we, the obvious question for that after that, Dorian, is how do we work out how much protein we are supposed to have as individuals, bearing in mind we're all different heights, weights, etc.?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so the answer is you want about 1 gram per pound of body weight, right? You probably don't know what that looks like, me just saying that, right? This is why the first thing I do with clients is we track, and you actually learn what that looks like. And most people are actually eating below the RDA, which is not what you need to be healthy. It's actually like what you need to avoid disease. But just roughly speaking, like having protein with every meal about the size of your hand. So 3 times a day, that much, the size of your hand, and you'll be there. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. For the English listeners, it's about 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So if you're 80 kilos like me, you want at least 160 grams of protein. And obesity is an interesting one. It's a controversial topic. Chris Williamson talks a lot about this, and he talks about the toxic compassion of obesity, and how people are prioritizing short-term looking good, saying to someone, "Oh no, you're not obese. Don't worry, you look great. There's no issues with being obese," despite the fact that they're going to die younger. They're more likely to have cardiovascular issues, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, digestive problems, osteoarthritis, sleep apnea, mental health issues, metabolic syndrome, reproductive problems, and increased risk of stroke. Those are all the listed side effects of obesity, but yet we are all too afraid, or not all of us are too afraid. I don't think I am, but maybe I would be if I saw someone in person. But yeah, I think we need to reframe this whole body positivity point and be like, no, actually, it's kinder to say to someone, you need to lose weight or you're going to die sooner.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And a lot of, when I have clients who struggle with weight, they'll say I'm fat. And I think, you have fat. I think you can reframe this in that you have fat, right? That you're not fat. That's not your identity. You might have fat. That doesn't mean you are. And if you reframe it like that, it can be a better way to look at it. I mean, obviously, I completely agree that there's a whole myriad of health issues that come with obesity, but a kind of way of saying it is reframing the conversation rather than just lying effectively, which is saying, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. Yes. And we're talking about obesity. And then also I wanted to take it back to, you said something quite interesting there, saying you can't detox. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, detox. So detoxification, right? Like you in the wellness space, I'm sure both of you, certainly you, Richard, have probably seen lots of stuff about detox diets, detox supplements. So detoxification is a real process that goes on in the body, right? It happens in your liver. There are two phases of detoxification, phase 1 or phase 2. They're controlled by genetics within your liver. So the first phase is mostly controlled by something called CYP450. And what the job of both phases is to turn the thing you want to get out of your body into a water-soluble product so it can come out in your wee or your stool, right? So the first phase is quite interesting because it's controlled, like I said, this gene called CYP450, which makes enzymes out of things like B vitamins or amino acids that we just discussed so that you can get stuff through that first gate so you can start to get rid of it. And caffeine only needs to go through that first gate, right? Caffeine doesn't need to go through both gates to become water soluble. So it's really interesting because there's only one gate. You can look, there's this massive genetic diversity on how fast people get rid of caffeine, right? On one end of the scale, you've got people who can clear caffeine in 2 hours, right? On the complete opposite end of the scale, there are people who clear caffeine in 36 hours, right? So if you're one of the 2 and everything in between. So if you're one of the 2 hour people, right, you can probably have a coffee after dinner and go to sleep and you're fine, right? If you're one of the 36-hour people, you have a coffee in the morning and you're still jittery in the evening and you can't get to sleep and it doesn't wear off until the next night. So I always find that one super interesting because it's a really good illustration. And like most people have some experience of that and they know where they probably are on that spectrum, depending on how they do with caffeine. Phase 2, detoxification is a little more complicated. It involves more enzymes and processes. Methylation, which we touched on earlier, Richard, which is a biochemical process, part of phase 2. So these are really nutrient-hungry processes. Okay, and detoxification isn't just about taking on toxins in your environment, like metals or pollutants or whatever it is. It's also, and stuff you eat, like caffeine or alcohol, it's also about your own hormones, right? You balance your hormones through how well you detoxify hormone. So something that that's really common is in female clients is estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance, which is basically your primary female sex hormones. Men and women have the same hormones, but in different proportions. Primary female sex hormones are progesterone and estrogen. And when they're in balance, there's no problem. When we have an issue, it's where estrogen is higher than progesterone. And that is a detoxification issue. You're not clearing estrogen fast enough. So does this all make sense before I carry on?
Andy?
I'm following. Yeah, no, I am following.
You're following?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please advise I'm following.
Okay, so that all makes sense. So yeah, estrogen dominance is primarily a detoxification issue, and detoxification issues are created by so I've laid out this process, right, which is a very nutrient hungry process. So detoxification is basically controlled by two things, actually. Your genetics, one, I just mentioned CYP450, MTHFR, which controls your methylation in the second part of your detoxification, is another genetic SNP. It's controlled by your genetics. Can't do anything about that. And then secondly, it's controlled by the availability of nutrients that you have to your liver, right? So detoxification basically becomes a gut function problem, because a diet primarily, are you eating the nutrients? And then secondly, gut function, are you extracting the nutrients? Right, so a diet and gut function problem. Does that make sense?
It does. My only question would be, again, it's kind of comes back to the knowing yourself, knowing your body.
Yeah.
How easy is it to get this kind of information in terms of what's going on inside you? Because it seems like that variance is quite critical to what you put in.
Yeah, and just this all sounds really complicated, and it probably sounds like it's really hard to manage your body or micromanage your body, but it's not, right? All of this stuff, and you can do that. You can do all those processes that I just said on a very varied diet. You probably know people on all dietary patterns that are thriving, eating lots of different ways. Okay, so for most part, if things are going well in your body, you don't have to think about this too hard, right? It's all automatic. I look at this from a point of view of when people come to me, one of these systems is broken, right? There's a positive feedback loop going on that needs to be, like, everything in your body is about homeostasis, which means if something's high, you lower it. If something's low, you raise it, right? When people come to me, these systems are not working the way they should. And we have to work how we're going to break that positive feedback loop to fix it, right? But for someone like you, Andy, I'm assuming you're primarily healthy. This isn't something you need to think too deeply about. And just to put in perspective, like, I was someone who at some point had to be extremely rigorous and strict with maybe my diet and stuff I did for my health, because my own health was in a terrible position. And I'm not now. Like I said, I just was on a rugby tour with my 9-year-old son, and I basically ate like crap for 2 days solid, and it didn't affect me that badly. And now I'm back on Monday and I feel absolutely fine and I'm getting on with my life, right? So these aren't things that you need to, for most people, as long as you're covering the basics, right, then you're probably not going to get a problem. It's only really when these systems break down that you need to dig in and really start to think about how we can solve those mechanisms.
How would someone know that they've got a system that's breaking down or has broken?
Well, you're going to have symptoms, right? So if you've got symptoms, any symptoms, fatigue, and there's only so many symptoms you can have, right? But so fatigue, pain, these are some of the main ones, right? Skin issues, gut issues. That's anything that's inhibiting your life, then there's something there that probably needs addressing, right? And they can vary in severity, obviously, from, this is something you can't ignore to maybe it's on or off, but all of these are check engine lights, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason I asked that is I think a lot of people just sort of deal with these things and they think they're normal. Like, for me, I had loose stool for about 2 years before I was like, this probably isn't normal. I should see a specialist. So your protocol, I really liked your protocol. You now have developed quite like a protocol you send everyone through. It includes like fasting and a meat-based diet. Tell us some more about your protocol.
Yeah, well, I would say I have a 12-week program, right? But I will say, I'm trained in functional medicine, which is meant to be personalized. So I do try to, it is meant to be personalized, and every individual that comes to me, I look and see what they need the most, and we'll deal with that. But I do find that I end up like covering the same bases. So I would say the major bases that I'm covering with almost everyone is the stuff we just discussed. So protein, like we might deal with that first. And then minerals. Minerals is a huge one, like electrolytes and minerals. When you're stressed, so your electrolytes are sodium, potassium, magnesium, fluoride, and calcium. They are essential for nervous function, right? There's like magnesium and calcium gates on your nerves. You use them for tons of different, sodium and potassium as well, tons of different things, right? And when you're stressed, you deplete electrolytes much faster. Okay. And by the way, when I use the term stress, I might not be using it in the way that most people think about it, right? Most people think of stress as anxiety, right? That is definitely stress, right? Psychological stress is definitely stress, but so is an accident. An accident is stress. A car accident, a surgery is stress. A nutrient deficiency or insufficiency is stress. These are all pressures that your body has to work around to keep you going, to keep the lights on, right? Lack of sleep is stress, which is kind of obvious. Overexercise is stress. All those things are stress. So when the body is dealing with stress, And by the way, if you have symptoms, your body is trying to adjust to a stress that's struggling to adapt to, right? Whatever those symptoms might be, you deplete electrolytes faster, right? And your body will jump through. When you go to A&E or the ER, if you're in America, one of the first things they will check if you've been in a severe accident is they'll check two things: your blood electrolytes, and then the pH of your blood. Because if either of those things goes off, you're in big trouble, right? So if you can pretty much, if the lights are on and you can walk around, your body is turning, and you're under stress, your body is turning all kinds of tricks to keep those blood electrolytes balanced. So we can, I look at minerals a lot, balancing those minerals. Those are probably the first things I would do with most people. And then I also, I use training, like strength training primarily as part of my, this, Richard, when we work together, like there, and we can definitely get into this if you want to, there is a relationship between your metabolic rate, how many calories you burn, and your immune system, right? It's quite an interesting relationship and mechanism that most people don't consider. And to cut a long story short, is if the faster your metabolic rate, or as your metabolic rate goes up, your immune activation goes down. So when you have immune stimulated clients, like histamine clients I deal with a lot, or autoimmune clients, increasing that metabolic rate is going to be like the core of their protocol. And getting stronger is one of the most powerful ways that you can increase your metabolic rate.
Yeah. No, that was one of the best things I learnt from working with you. So I did this sort of reverse diet that Dorian put me on, because I'd done years of sort of calorie restriction, from fitness modeling and trying to be in cover model ready shape. I'd really messed up my metabolism, and Dorian basically had me increase my calories by 100 calories per week up until I got to about 4,000 calories. And I didn't really put on any weight, even though I was eating 4,000 calories. And then when I went I did put on a little bit of weight, I probably went from like 7% body fat to 11% body fat. And then when I wanted to diet back down to get my abs, I was dieting down on like 3,000 calories. So I was losing weight on such a big amount, which just made dieting so easy.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
And sorry, just to be clear, that's because you were strength training in such
Well, it was a combination of the strength training, but it was the fact that I was like increasing my basal metabolic rate. I was increasing the furnace. Is that how you would describe it, Dorian?
So there's three ways you can increase your metabolic rate, okay? And we've discussed all of them already, right? One is protein, right? Optimal protein. So I think in your case, Richard, for example, we optimize that, right? You can increase your calories, which is what Richard's talking about, the reverse diet, and you can increase your strength. Okay. It's impossible. If you can lift, I'm just going to make up numbers, right? If you can lift 100 for 5, and then you can lift 200 for 5, it is impossible to get to that without significantly increasing your metabolism, right? There's a lot of ways you get stronger. One of the ways is you actually increase your mitochondrial density, right? So the mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells. So you can have a muscle cell that's weak with not very much mitochondria. You can have a muscle cell that's much stronger with many mitochondria. And that has so many side benefits, because they're like I said, they're energy hazards for your cells. They also reduce oxidative stress, right? So oxidative stress is reduced with mitochondrial density. So there's like loads of side benefits to doing this. But like I've found, just through my clinical experience, but also like I'm not reinventing the wheel here. This is quite a well-established mechanism. The human body responds to stress in two ways, right? It tries to adapt you to famine, and it tries to adapt you to infectious disease, because those are the two things that killed the most of our ancestors, right? So your body sees stress, right? It might be a surgery, but your body thinking famine, infectious disease, right? So as it deals with a stress load, cortisol, your stress hormone, goes up to help you deal with that. Immune activation goes up, and your metabolic rate goes down, right? To make you more efficient, so that you can survive an infectious disease event or a famine event, right? And if you can reverse out of that, like the opposite happens, right? And there's certain things like, I find this process is really, really easy in men. So Richard's a great example. It's much easier in men than compared to women. It's not impossible in women. You still get great results doing this with women, but that's through testosterone, basically, because men make testosterone easier. So we start doing that with Richard, right? And his major sex hormone is testosterone. He responds super well. He's banging up to 4,000 calories. It's a slower process with women. It's a more difficult process. But again, we're still looking to make androgens. We're still looking to make testosterone in women. Testosterone, which also, by the way, puts the brakes on your immune system.
Yeah, I think for my experience of when I was coaching people on nutrition, especially with women, they'd reduce their calories so much, and then they couldn't lose any weight. I had a client who was on like 1,100 calories, and yet was her diet her fat loss had plateaued, and it was just like she was in a car stuck in the mud, just spinning her wheels. And I was like, no, you need to reverse out. You need to reverse diet out, get your basal metabolic rate up to 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, and then start again with the fat loss.
Yes,
absolutely. So am I to take it that we're too kind of fixated on calories then? Is that the problem? Because I suppose I'm thinking in terms of I don't know, there was a diet a while ago, the 5-2 diet. I don't know if that still exists, but that was very, very centered on I don't know what it was. I never did it, but like it seems like the basis of most diets people tend to go on are literally just calorie based.
Yes, you're right. And people, obviously calories are relevant, right? Energy is relevant, and we can't escape energy balance. But calories in is just one part of the equation, right? That doesn't tell you anything about what you're expending. And Richard made a great point, because that's a typical avatar. Most of my clients, by the time they start to get chronic symptoms, actually have been on and off restrictive diets, for usually calorie restrictive diets, for many, many decades, right? You're sending this famine signal, right? Famine signal. I have a long-standing client we've got some really good results with, but not 100%. And we'd never tracked her calories. We tracked it, and she was on about 1,100. That's barely enough to, imagine what your body's doing, right? It's titrating resources. It's like, okay, luxury resources gone. Sexual function, we don't need that, right? Warm hands and feet, we don't need that, right? You're just titrating resources away. So, and obviously gut function, right? Don't need that, right? In a famine, let's get rid of gut function. So now any food you put in there, you get bloated and all sorts of stuff. So I think that calories is obviously important, but it has to be considered within the nuance of the whole system, right? I mean, absolutely, if you're obese and you restrict calories, you're going to lose weight. Okay, but I think it's also important what's the end goal there, right? I mean, if you look at the biggest loser competitors, for example, there was actually a study on them, and I think all of them put all the weight back on and some more, because all they did was dramatically restrict calories and do crazy exercise regimes that weren't sustainable. So it should always be in the context of, what's the end goal? And I like to say you chase health before you chase weight loss anyway, right? Because if you're healthy, you've got a healthy metabolism, and you can actually lose weight on a reasonable amount of nutrients,
Yeah. I want to ask a question about the timing of meals and the timing of calorie intakes. Is there anything to that? I mean, just taking the standard breakfast, lunch, dinner, I imagine that's how many people get their calories, but is there any kind of things to avoid or things to be mindful of, or should we be eating at more regular intervals?
No, I mean, this is going to be a really boring answer. the 3 meals a day paradigm is a pretty good paradigm for most people, right? Some people do better on 2, some people do better on 4, right? But for the most part, it's 3 meals a day is a pretty good paradigm. Andrew Huberman's done something about the ideal morning routine. I think breakfast within 90 minutes of waking is for your ideal breakfast time. A high protein breakfast within 90 minutes waking, I think that's right. And then you do want to pay attention to when you eat late at night, because it will mess with your sleep, right? So if I would say 2 to 3, ideally 3 hours before you go to bed, you want to have eaten. So you want that food digested and out of your system. Digesting is actually stimulating. It will keep you awake if you're digesting as you go to bed. So, but outside that, there's not much to it. Like intermittent fasting has been all the rage. It might still be, I'm not sure. But skipping breakfast, there's nothing magic about skipping breakfast. If you lose weight from intermittent fasting because you're just dramatically reducing your calories, I see women doing particularly badly on intermittent fasting, right? There is this morning cortisol rise, which wakes you up. It starts about 4 in the morning and your cortisol rises. That is what gets you up in the morning around 6 or 7. And if you don't eat, so insulin will blunt the cortisol response, right? If you don't eat, that cortisol just keeps going so that you can release glycogen from your liver. That's one of the things that cortisol does to compensate for the food that you're not having. And if you're someone who's already stressed, that's probably not a great strategy. Well, I'm not saying that's a disaster for everyone. Again, if you're pretty healthy, you can be resilient to this stuff. But if you're someone who stress might be a problem, if a chronic symptoms are a problem, that might not be the best strategy. So, but there's no magic really to any of this. And like I said, it's boring answer, 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
No, that's a reassuring answer, if anything.
Yeah. No, there was a study very recently that came out. I think Layne Norton was looking at it, just showing they had a calorie restricted diet versus an intermittent fasting diet, and they both lost the exact same amount of weight. But people found the intermittent fasting diet easier because it was just simple. It's just like, okay, I don't eat until 2 p.m. in the afternoon. That's really simple. People prefer that to counting calories. And, I think so many diets, it is just about creating a calorie deficit. Right. It's just finding different tricks to do that, whether it's compressing your feeding window or removing a whole macronutrient like the low fat diet or the low carb diet, etc. And Andrew Hubberman's done a morning routine. I've also done one. It's on Medium. If people want to see my morning routine, it's blowing up on Medium, getting loads of comments.
I don't know what Medium is, but
medium.com. It's a place where people who can't get published in proper publications publish their articles. It's like Instagram for articles.
Okay.
But it's it's good nonetheless.
So what differs? What's the difference? Major differences between your routine?
Nothing. I just plagiarized his.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, what gives you the confidence to deviate from Andrew Huberman's?
No, I don't deviate. I just add a few extra things. I'm a bit more of a biohacking nerd than him. But yeah, I definitely agree with his avoid caffeine 2 hours before, after waking up into the whole cortisol spike and get morning
sunlight. And why is that? Sorry, Rich. I think a lot of people have caffeine. I mean, I do. Speaking, a lot of people, I think, have a caffeine within 2 hours of waking up.
Because your adenosine system doesn't wake up for the first 2 hours. Your body is already producing cortisol, and then putting more caffeine in just creates more cortisol, and then creates more stress, and then you don't get the energy boost. Basically, is that right, Dorian?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think that one's a really good one, by the way. This is a real point of contention that I have with clients. It's like the coffee after breakfast as opposed to before breakfast. So, but that's one that people, that's a really good tip or hack or whatever you want to say that you can do tomorrow, and you actually will notice a difference from that to your morning energy levels.
I will do that tomorrow.
Yes. And what you do want to do in my morning routine is salt in water, LMNT. So I think this is one thing a lot of people get confused about is salt, Dorian. So tell us what people are getting wrong about salt.
Man, where do you want me to start? I mean, the salt thing, so I went on a whole tangent about minerals earlier, balancing minerals, and the master electrolytes. So it's electrolytes. Remember I said stress, you deplete electrolytes. It's not really a game of how much you eat. So when I say you've got to balance electrolytes, that doesn't mean you should be eating magnesium or calcium, although those things can be useful in the right context. It's more a game of how much you hold on to, how much electrolytes you retain, right? And for that, the master electrolyte, if you like, is sodium, because sodium found in salt will allow you to retain more electrolytes, right? So if you went from a processed food diet, which most people are on, to a whole food diet, you are almost certainly too low in salt, right? There's a really great study, a meta-analysis, which looks at, so sodium is essential, right? It's an essential part of it's an essential nutrient. You have to consume it. And there's a really good meta-analysis on all-cause mortality, so death from any cause, cancer, stroke, heart disease, and sodium intake. And the bottom of the U curve, okay, so the lowest risk of sodium is about 6 to 8 grams of sodium. It's not going to mean anything to you, but I'll try and put this in context. If you have a purely whole food diet with no sodium, you're probably eating about 2 grams of sodium, right? And on that U curve, the low sodium axis was sharper than the higher sodium. right? Because obviously then you have serious deficiencies. So it is often a case that sometimes people will go from a processed food diet to a whole food diet and feel worse. And this is usually what's happening when it happens. It's a sodium thing. So then supplementing sodium, salt, just drink salt, right? So 3 teaspoons of salt per day, that is 6 grams of sodium. So you can just measure out 3 teaspoons in the morning, you put that on your food and drink it as well, and that's fine. And that will help you retain the electrolytes you eat. So you eat potassium in your food, you'll retain that from the sodium. So where people have gone wrong on salt is this salt and blood pressure. There is association with sodium and heart disease and heart attacks. It's an association, right? Is the key word. So correlation doesn't equal causation. We're talking about observational studies. Who eats the most sodium in a population? The people who eat the most processed foods. Right? If you wake up in the morning, you have a bowl of cornflakes or brown flakes, and then you go to work and you have a store-bought sandwich, and then you come home and you have a microwave meal. That's the diet of a lot of people, right? You're eating you're eating like 15, 16 grams of sodium, right? So, and even that, by the way, doesn't even demonize sodium. It could just be down to the fact that because it's correlation, not causation. It could just be down to the fact that they're eating more processed foods. So actually, sodium doesn't have an effect on your blood pressure. It can have a transient effect in some people who are salt sensitive, but it doesn't have a chronic effect. It's actually insulin. The insulin has a relationship with aldosterone, which is your fluid balance steroid hormone. And it's elevated insulin, chronically elevated insulin, that will elevate your blood pressure. Does that answer the sodium thing?
Okay.
I don't think you asked me about blood pressure, so I don't know if you need to.
No, it does. Yeah, I think it answers why it's been kind of demonized, I suppose. If someone put a lot of salt on their food, I think you'd be kind of thinking that's intrinsically just thinking that's bad.
Yes. Yeah.
So is it right that too much salt is still too bad, or is it just too much salt? You're getting that salt in because people are eating ultra processed foods.
So if you look at the curve on the meta-analysis I showed you, right? It's like I can't draw it here, but basically you could be eating. By the way, if you ate 12 grams of sodium as whole food salt, it would be really hard, right? You'd be drinking seawater and eating food that was unpalatable. Right, so it would be really, really hard without the processed foods. So again, that the data is correlational. So I don't think we can draw causation of actually that it's the sodium that necessarily does that. But like I said, I mean, it's really hard to get too much sodium if you're just doing it from salt. Really, really hard. And I always say there's a context thing to this. If you're someone watching who has chronic symptoms, you might need more salt than that, right? Because you're depleting minerals at a faster rate. So I work with a lot of people who have post-orthostatic tachycardia. That's where you stand up and you get a really fast heart rate. Your body is basically giving you a shot of adrenaline because you're not maintaining fluid pressure. So for some of those people, like we're doing 12, 14 grams of salt a day, which is quite difficult, because it helps them maintain that fluid pressure.
And what's your favorite salt? Celtic salt, Redmond real salt? What should people go out and buy?
I just have pink Himalayan. I'm not really much of, I mean, if you're talking purely about sodium, table salt, right, is that you get in the fish and chip shop is fine. If you're just talking about sodium, if we're being really splitting hairs here, right, sea salt has microplastics in it. Right. I don't think that means if you have sea salt, you should really worry too much about that. But ancient sea salts like Redmond real salt or pink Himalayan don't have any microplastics.
I actually wanted to come on to that and plastics, if you knew much about plastics, because I'm getting increasingly worried about plastics, and in particular plastics from clothes and polyester. Because I don't know if you've seen these studies, but they did this study where they put polyester underwear on dogs versus cotton underwear on dogs, and the dogs with the polyester underwear became infertile. And similarly, they did another study showing that men who wore polyester slings over their scrotums for a 12-month period found that all participants became functionally sterile within an average of 139 days. And yeah, the mechanism of action is, one, polyester is too hot, so the scrotum get overheated. But then the other thing is about DNA damage and the plastics in there. So you did earlier talk about saying it's not possible to detox. So is there any way to to detox plastics?
Yeah,
plastics.
So the thing that stood out to me from everything you said there was a sling for your scrotum.
Yeah, you wearing yours? Yeah. I'm wearing mine. Yeah.
Why not just pants? You have a sling to scrotum. So let me go back to what you said of it's not possible to detox. You might have misunderstood me there. What do you think I said? And then I'll tell you what I actually said.
Andy, you guys are going to say something?
No, I was going to say, I think ingesting plastics, I just took to be a really bad thing. And I guess I assume that's because you can't pass it.
Yeah.
Or it's more difficult to pass.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought you said, you can't detox, or you can't do detox diets like juice cleanses.
Yeah. So you can't. So those will not help you detox. Is the truth. That's all. You do detox. You can detox plastics. You can detox almost any toxin, metals, or plastics that you ingest through your environment. But obviously, it's adding to the toxic load. The plastics thing is tough. I like to build, rather than scaremonger. I would like to build from the ground up with the things that you have control over, right? So let's say someone is absolutely smashing, their diet, their stress, they're managing their stress really well, all this stuff. Then I might start to look at plastics, only because those are the big rocks you're going to get the most results from. But then, as an aside, as a point of interest in this conversation, it is something that I am actually quite worried about, right? Like, it is ubiquitous in the environment. So they have found, like, polar bears, they've done autopsies on polar bears that they find plastics in their fat now, right? These polar bears haven't come into no contact with humans, but it's because it's like the same reason it's in the sea salt, it's in the fish as well, right? So you can also escape the plastics. There are some really interesting trends, and plastics, I suspect, is not the full explanation, but part of the explanation. So hormone issues in women, so specifically estrogen dominance, that is a plastics thing, I think, as well, right? That's not just a gut function and detox issue. I think it's because they're getting more xenoestrogens from the environment. Receipts are really bad, by the way. Don't ever touch receipts. Those are one of the worst ones.
Receipts?
Yeah.
The plastic.
The ink on the receipt specifically,
So don't get receipts.
I think they did. Yeah, they've done studies on Tesco's checkout workers and found really high imbalances of hormones because of touching receipts all day long.
Exactly.
So you will actually see now you'll notice it. You'll see some wearing like rubber gloves or working at Tesco's doing the checkout because of that.
Yeah. So those are one of the worst offenders. But like it's covering your food. It's like it's everywhere. And then obviously there's the testosterone crisis with men. And I don't think that plastics is maybe the main part of that, right? We can talk about inactive lifestyle, obesity, all these other things, but it's certainly part of that. I think it's part of the testosterone crisis that we've got. So it is a big problem. If you're listening to this, again, like there are massive rocks that you should fix before you start to look at plastics. But like I use glass pretty much for everything, storing food, stuff like that. Like in my home, I've eliminated plastics as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, I think there are, for our listeners, the biggest, worst offenders are things like those really thin plastic water bottles. Yeah. The single-use ones. A much firmer plastic, like an Nalgene bottle, is going to leach less plastic into it than a really soft, like crunchy one. And heat as well. If you live in a hot country and you've got a water bottle in your car and that's getting heated up to 40 degrees, that's going to leach a lot of plastics.
100%.
Polyester is the one that I'm getting. My Instagram feed it's just all cotton clothing because it knows I'm obsessed with polyester and particular polyester when you're, again, with heat. If you are sweating and you're working out in polyester underwear and polyester t-shirts and sports bras and leggings, that's where the plastics can get into your system. So try and find organic cotton t-shirts and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, as you mentioned water, I would actually quite like to ask you, Dorian, about going back to basics, as is what I like to do. Water intake. Again, it's one of those things you hear a lot of buzzwords, 8 pints, so many liters. yada yada.
I'm going to say something controversial on this, probably. Right?
Please do.
Probably. I think water intake is all about your minerals and electrolyte balance. That is more important. So your water intake matters less if that is balanced. Now, I'm generally recommending my clients to drink quite a lot of water because they've got to get the salt and the electrolytes in. Generally, they're taking it with water, so they end up drinking a lot. But like part of the purpose of water balance and part of hydration is that mineral balance, right? And actually, if you have purely filtered reverse osmosis water and all you drink is that, you will dehydrate yourself, paradoxically, because it's not sticking, right? The minerals help the water stick. When they look at like modern day hunter-gatherers, of which there are less and less, but they're a very interesting study because they're like a control group for humans. They don't drink much at all, like the Hadza who live in Tanzania. They don't have much access to water. They're digging sort of ground wells and getting water out of that. But the water is highly mineralized, right? And obviously in our environment, probably we were drinking highly mineralized water. So I'm not saying just don't drink any water. I'm absolutely not saying that, but I'm saying, drink water when you're thirsty and be more concerned about your minerals and the sodium piece.
So an obvious extension to that question then is, should we be filtering our water, or should we be kind of welcoming the many minerals that come through?
Can I take this one, Dorian?
Yeah, you go for it.
Sorry, can I jump in?
If you must.
Yeah, sorry. I'm itching on this one because I have conversations with people about this quite a lot. Tap water is a nightmare. Please don't ever drink it. I always put up memes of me being sick when I see people drinking tap water, and I also put up memes of people say like, oh, in Paris or Madrid we have the cleanest tap water in the world. Look at these studies. And it's like, well, those studies, those readings are taken at the plant. What are the pipes like in your building? What are the pipes like in your city? And then you actually find photos online of what pipes look like in cities, and they are absolutely disgusting. They will make you sick, what goes through that. But also, this water is dead water. It hasn't got any minerals. It's also unstructured. So yes, definitely a reverse osmosis or a Berkey water filter is a good place to start, and a reverse osmosis system that you can remineralize. And some systems come automatically with a remineralization system. I use the AquaTrue. That's an over-the-counter one. So if you live in London, it doesn't take up much space. That also remineralizes the water. But even better, what you can do is get spring water. So we're lucky we have a company out here called Alive Water, where they deliver water from a spring nearby in glass bottles. And so, and kind of in the hierarchy of water to drink, local spring water that comes in glass bottles. And then below that, I guess local spring water that comes in very firm plastic bottles. And then below that, a reverse osmosis water that is remineralized. Would you agree with all that, Dorian?
I would 100%. I would completely agree. I have nothing to add to that. So you nailed it.
Perfect answer.
I was really hoping there'd be some absolute undercut there.
He nailed it. Nailed it.
Good. And also I think I love the taste of sparkling water as well. So San Pellegrino is a really good one. Topo Chico, and Paul Saladino is obsessed with Gerald Steiner. I don't know why, but it's become a bit of a status symbol in the health industry. Which kind of sparkling bottled water can you drink?
I'm a San Pellegrino fan myself, but we don't have those. But to be fair, we don't have those other ones in the UK. At least not that I've seen.
Yeah. No,
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Perrier is the other one.
We have. We do.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about meat. Where do you stand on meat and veganism, Dorian?
I am. So I'm very pro meat in general as part of your diet. I think humans are omnivorous, right? I think the ultimate diet for most people includes both. But I think that if we're looking at where we get most of our nutrients, where should you get your optimal nutrients from? Things like protein and some B vitamins, vitamin A, iron, you're going to be getting those primarily from animal foods, right? You don't need to go to spinach for iron. You should be getting that from animal foods. You shouldn't be looking at lentils for protein. You get that from animal foods. And then plant foods are good for other things, right? You can get vitamin C in liver, but like obviously plant foods, broccoli is a much better source of vitamin C, right? You get fiber in plant foods that you don't get in animal foods. So I think you should start looking at foods for the optimal where is the best place I can get each nutrient? And again, Andy, this comes back to kind of what you were saying earlier. Like, you don't need to think about this too much. Just have an omnivorous diet, right? Just be an omnivore. You don't need to be too low carb. You don't need to be too low fat. Be an omnivore. And there is some nuance and tinkering that you can do in that. Some people definitely do better lower carb. Some people definitely do better lower fat. But you should experiment within the bounds of you being an omnivore, basically. Vegan diet. So in my practice, I don't see vegans or vegetarians. I won't see vegans or vegetarians. So that is not because I'm saying this diet doesn't work for anyone at all. There are people out there that you can find on the interwebs that are doing absolutely well, probably better than me, looking jacked and with rippling muscles who are vegans. But like the sickest people, I used to work in probably the largest nutritionist in the UK called London Clinic of Nutrition. So free plug for them there. And I would see everyone, right? And the sickest people I saw with the hardest to improve problems were vegans and occasionally vegetarians. And a lot of these problems were neurological. A lot of them were from sort of years of quite severe nutrient deficiencies. And the ones that would be open-minded enough or cared about, would prioritize their health enough to go over to the other side, would get great results, as long as it wasn't too late on all that stuff. So, what is the point in me seeing a vegan or a vegetarian that doesn't want to eat meat, and the only advice, the thing that's going to make the most difference for them is just to eat some meat, right? So I'm not a fan. Generally speaking, again, I'm saying I think there's massive genetic diversity in the human population. I'm sure there are people out there. I think it's probably, men tend to do better on restrictive diets than women on a whole, right? Men have a lot more capacity for a lot more fasting. They can do better on lower carb diets. They're better on all kinds of extreme diets. I see men probably doing better than women on vegan diets. That's where I've seen real disasters with women. Women have to have the nutrients to be able to build a baby once a month, right? So those were probably the biggest shit shows I saw from veganism. So I think I've seen people fail on all diets, but the failures on veganism have been much worse, generally speaking, for people's health. And that is why it's not something I would do lightly, right? There would have to be a very specific I'm sure there are specific reasons. I'm sure there are people out there who don't. So alpha-gal, you can't eat. Alpha-gal's a tick-borne infection. You can't eat red meat. That would be a good reason to avoid red meat. But it is not something like, I've seen people fail on keto and it's like, oh, I felt really tired all the time. Whereas I see people fail on veganism and it's a slightly more serious health issue.
I think one of the main arguments that people would put forward for veganism, and it's not one I know too much about, but it's obviously the environmental side of things. So I suppose, is there a kind of is there a sustainable health way to eat that much protein?
Yeah, great question.
If you're eating meat,
we can break this down on several levels. So we can start with is it environmentally friendly to be sick? Right. So that's the first. The answer is no. Right. The healthcare industry is a significant burden to the environment. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, the argument of methane from cows causing climate change. I think this is an argument that has basically been co-opted by people who have an ethical bent towards reducing people's meat consumption. Because if you understand the carbon cycle, you understand there is a difference between existing carbon in the atmosphere and digging up carbon from under the sea to release into the environment, right? It's estimated that before the Younger Dryas extinction event, so 12,000 years ago, there was a mass extinction event, right? And the biomass of megafauna, so megafauna being things like bison, mammoths, things like that, the biomass was equivalent to the population of humans today, so 7 billion or 8 billion humans, whatever we have today. So it's quite hard for people to imagine, because we have this, we've only known the world post-agriculture, right? And one of the reasons we went into agriculture was probably because we were so efficient at hunting that it wasn't possible to be a hunter-gatherer at some point, right? But, if you've ever been to a game reserve in Africa, there's literally a herd around every single corner. That is what the whole of the earth looked like. ruminant animals are actually part of the environment, right? They're an essential part of the environment that put nutrients back into the soil as part of the carbon cycle. And that's why ruminant animals have evolved on every continent in conjunction with the evolution of grass. So, and then also you can look at the EPA data, and I think that 9% of global emissions are agriculture, of which 4% are red meat. So I don't think, or meat, not just red meat, just all meat. So I don't think that argument holds up. I mean, have I given a good enough answer to that?
Yeah.
No, perfect. Yeah. And it's not an argument I advance, but it's an argument I hear quite a lot.
Yeah. There's a great book called Sacred Cow by Rob Wolf. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but they go into a lot of these sort of false claims. Like, some vegans say that cattle production is up to 51% of the methane emissions when it's only 4.9%. And there are, a lot of disinformation campaigns out there from the biggest emitters of methane, which is transport and oil and gas and things like that. And one of their big sayings in Sacred Cow is it's not the cow, it's the how. And yes, in these factory farms we are producing more emissions than we should, but if we went to regenerative agriculture, it will change emissions so much. And not all land can be cropped. I think they say only 60% of the world's land can be farmed. So if we got rid of the cows, it's not like we could just plant crops there. Cows can go on land that we can't grow things on. 100%. And I try to buy all my dairy and meat from regenerative farms. And I think that's something we can actually really do to help emissions, is buy meat from regeneratively farmed areas. And these places, they're sequestering carbon. So there's a statistic like factory farmed beef creates like three somethings of carbon emissions. A Beyond Meat burger produces 1 point less, so it's like 2 carbon emissions. Regenerative agriculture creates -1 of these carbon emissions. So it is something eating meat from these places is something you can do for the environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in the same way that, that Richard ripped his morning routine off Andrew Huberman, I basically ripped all my statistics that I just gave then off Sacred Cow. That is an absolutely awesome book.
Yeah.
So
we'll provide a link. Yeah. I haven't read it actually, so I'll be reading it.
Yeah, yeah. And you can look also like I think the current the amount of cows in America has been falling because dairy and beef production has got more efficient. And I think it's about 100 million head now. And when Westerners Europeans first counted the bison herds in America before they tried to wipe them all out, right? There was about 60 to 80 million bison. And that doesn't include how many elk or white-tailed deer or mule deer or all the other animals that there were, other ruminant animals they were doing all their things in the 1800s. So I think people don't, I think it's a myth that can only really exist where people are only living their urban-centric lives and don't really want to understand what the natural world is like.
Yeah. And it's an ideology. It's not based on science. A lot of these people pushing the veganism stuff and the environmental, that's their religion. They're not looking at the facts. They don't want to know the truth. They just want to believe in something and have something to fight for. And hence these statistics normally just like roll off their back. They're not going to change their mind on these things.
Yeah. But it's quite pervasive because that's one that people just accept now. Like the man on the street, if you ask them, is cows for the environment, even if they're not vegan, they'll probably just go, oh yeah, I think they probably are, but I like meat, right? That's what most people will probably say if you ask them on the street. So it's quite pervasive, that one. And in England, I'm sure you've seen, Andy, there are just these, I think there's corn adverts now saying better for the environment. And it really irks me because these claims are baseless. They're baseless claims, and there's no one pulling them up on it.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah,
we're doing it.
Apart from us.
I totally agree. I think if someone said that in a room full of 100 people, I don't think there'd be one person who would present the counter argument. It just seems like it is completely pervasive, as you say.
Yeah, correct.
Which I suppose leads nicely into a segue. We like to sort of pick up BS of the week from a particular part of the wellness industry. So,
I think we've covered a lot of BS.
Is that our BS of the week?
Going back to the sort of the health stuff, why do people mistakenly believe meat is bad for them?
Why do they believe meat's bad for them? Well, where do you want me to start? So I think the main one is the LDL, so saturated fats, increasing your LDL, your cholesterol, your bad cholesterol to give you heart disease. I think it's there's a lot more to it than that. There is also the World Health Organization there's this colon cancer claim with red meat, where they lump together. Well, actually, it's not even red meat; it was processed meat. So processed meat gives you the statistic is it gives you an 18% increase in the risk of colorectal cancer. But then if you look at the study, that's relative risk, not absolute risk. If you look at absolute risk, your lifetime risk is 5%. And the people who ate more processed meat, it was 1% more, so 6%, which is an 18% increase. So that's kind of obfuscating the data. And then you look further and you look at the studies they used, they're observational studies, which is low quality. The data collected on observational studies is from surveys, which are shown to not be accurate. So what can we really take from this is not very much, to be honest. I think that the LDL and the colorectal cancer are the two major things that contribute to people's beliefs that it might be harmful to their health. But I don't think both of those don't hold up that well. And even if the LDL thing, even if saturated fats and LDL, even if that is a concern to you, you don't need to, you can eat meat and not have high saturated fat anyway.
Yeah, I think the anti-meat thing has just gotten some really good press with terrible documentaries on Netflix, and thankfully a lot of people are calling that out. People like Layne Norton, Paul Saladino, Peter Attia, etc. So I think we're going to see the pendulum swing back into the favor of meat is a part of a balanced diet, and it can be good for the environment. I think. I'm not sure if regeneratively grown meat is available in the UK, but out here in the US, every store you can find regenerative farms in the shopping aisles.
Yeah, I think veganism is actually falling now. I think the pendulum has already swung. I think it peaked. You remember the game change. So all these documentaries are very well funded, so they're quite well made, but well made bullshit. I heard a statistic that whenever that came out, whether it was 2019 or 2018, I think it was 5% of the US identified as vegetarian and 3% as vegan, and that's now 4 and 1%. So I think that the failure rates. The veganism is its own worst enemy in that the failure rate is so high. The more people that try it, the more people will not do it again, basically.
Yes, indeed. I think What the Health is the new one. It's sort of the Game Changers Part 2 that a lot of people have.
Is that a vegan documentary on Netflix?
A lot of scientists have just been like, this is, there's no thesis. There's no, it's not a scientific experiment. Like you haven't controlled anything, and it's just propaganda once you actually unpick it.
Exactly.
So you also utilize breathwork in your studies. Tell us about how you work with breathwork.
I knew you'd sneak that in.
Well, yeah.
Well, all my breathwork I know about from this guy called Richard Blake. So
I've heard he's great.
So yeah, you've done. I've done breathwork with you, but you did. I'll tell you. So you know a lot more than breathwork than me. So you're going to be able to add more to this conversation than I am. But I have a lot of long COVID clients, right? And if you look at the data on long COVID, one of the problems with long COVID is you don't seem to be carrying oxygen in your blood in the same way, and you're not getting oxygen into your slow twitch muscle fibers in the same way. And that's one of the issues that they found, that it seems to be common across long COVID. And in my group, I had, it's particularly the Soma breathworks that you do. So you gave me a presentation for a Soma breathwork. So you gave me a presentation, and then you went through a Soma breathwork session. And as you're in my group, you know this well. I said to one of my long COVID clients to start doing that because the blood oxygen was always low. And if she did that in the morning, it just normalized her blood oxygen for the whole day. So that is my standard recommendation for people who have long COVID, to start doing that Soma breathwork first thing in the morning.
Yeah. Well, that was a shameless plug for me. I did set Dorian.
I was going to say, can we just
remind
ourselves what Soma breathwork is, please?
Yes, I was about to, yes. So Soma breathwork is a type of breathwork that I'm certified to teach. It involves intermittent hypoxia. So it's breathing in a rhythm, and then intermittent hypoxia just means breath holds. And it is something you can find on YouTube. Actually, there are plenty of Soma practitioners out there who have YouTube sessions for free. They normally only last 20 minutes. Just type in Soma. I've got a friend called Evolution of Dave who does a lot of good ones with some good music. So type in Evolution of Dave Soma.
Great name.
Breathwork. Tell him the Breath Geek sent you. But yeah, I set Dorian up for this because one of his clients did reach out to me, and she was really kind. She was like sharing her blood oxygen saturation levels on Instagram and putting it out to all her friends who were suffering with long COVID. And yeah, she gave me a lot of good press. So thank you to her and to Dorian for promoting the benefits of breathwork for long COVID.
Yeah. No, it's been really interesting, that one.
All right. Yeah. Anything else, Andy, before we
No, I was just going to ask where we find you, Dorian. Where can we find
Great question.
your good work?
My probably the best place to find me is on Instagram. My Instagram is summit_health. Right, that's my main Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. I have a group on Facebook, and you can find me there. But I suggest probably follow me on Facebook. That's the best place to get me.
And you've got a website as well, don't you, Dorian? What's that?
I do. It's summit-health.co.uk.
Okay, and you work individually with people, and you send them on their protocol as well, right?
That's exactly right. So I run a program. I practice functional medicine. The program is individualized to you, and depending on what you need, most of my clients are histamine issues, so mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, long COVID stuff, POTS, autoimmune, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid issues, Hashimoto, stuff like that. I have Graves' disease myself, so I have a lot of Graves' disease clients, which is a thyroid issue, and gut issues as well.
Right, great.
Fantastic. It's a 12-week program, you said, Dorian?
That's right, yeah. It's a 12-week program. That's my flagship program. And then I have longer-term clients as well, but everyone comes in on the 12-week program.
Nice.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And
this has been
as
fun.
Always, I've learned a lot, but I feel like I've learned especially large amount of things this week. So thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks for thinking about me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we want to spread the word of the good practitioners out there. And Andy,
where can we find you, Rich?
Where can you find me? You can find me at richardlblake.com. You can find me on Instagram at The Breath Geek. And you can find Andy on his LinkedIn, which is Andrew Esam. And I don't
even know if it is.
Is it?
But it's
Andy Esam?
It's something on there. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an unusual surname. Just type in Esam, ESAM.
Easy, Sam. Yeah, like us, please. Desperately, we need your approval. That's why we're doing this. We also
external
need your reviews,
validation.
External validation. We're very insecure, and if we don't get those like numbers, we will feel sad. You don't want us to feel sad, do you? That's mean. No, reviews really help, and tell your friends. Thanks very much. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, and thank you, Andy and Dorian.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Absolute pleasure. Bye.
Bye.